Told you, I don't know if I ever told you this um assessment of Mahatma Gandhi by Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was a sage, proper sage, not one of these Baba Ramdev types. And while talking about Mahatma Gandhi, he said the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi is that he lives by his principles. And his principles are those which uh, are what he considers to be the truth. So he will act on the basis of what he believes are morally correct principles, but he doesn't expect results. He doesn't expect results. He says, it's not in my hand. What is in my hand is what I can do. After that, if something that I anticipate I want to happen, then uh, it's not in my hand at all. So if you actually see what Gandhi said during the Mopla rebellion, the Mopla region is in the present day Kerala. There was a rebellion which had to do with the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement was when the Ottoman Turks uh, basically got rid of the Ottoman Empire, and under the leadership of Kemal Ataturk, they started moving away from traditional Islam and they were modernizing, as Ataturk himself said. And Gandhi said, sorry, at that particular time, a rebellion broke out in Mobla because the Muslims believed that the Hindus didn't support them in their cause of saying that the Ottoman Empire should have persisted and Kemal Ataturk shouldn't have come into power. So they massacred a lot of Hindus, innocent people. And Ambedkar asked him, you talk about non-violence. What is it that these people have done? People who are getting slaughtered, Hindus are getting slaughtered, uh, for no fault of theirs. So Gandhi's reply to that was, I do not control and cannot control cosmic happenings. All I know is that the Muslims are fighting for their identity in Turkey. Now, the people in the Mobla region believe that Islam is under threat. And I do not want to say that please don't, you know, kill Hindus or whatever, because what have they done to you? I I made an appeal, and despite that, if the Muslims slaughter Hindus, he said there's nothing we can do. And if because of this slaughtering, a new social order with no Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism in it comes into being, that is the will of the cosmos. Who are we to talk about what the cosmos wants? So Gandhi was like that. He basically did things that he believed in, and after that, he said the results are not in our hands. If the results are contrary to what we expect, accept them. There's nothing else you can do. But when you live your life, live as per the principles of Dharma. You can't ask other people to do that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm not Gandhiji, by the way. He's a great man. I'm a stupid fellow. I am doing something which I believe is the right thing for me to do. And that is because of the fact that I practically created this curriculum. I take this as my responsibility. It's a different matter that my health has not been cooperating with me. So we're having these horrible breaks. But otherwise, I would really like to have uh, done all this in a much better fashion, not patchy like it is today. I'm actually not very satisfied. I'm not thrilled about how I've been teaching. So, anyway, within my limitations, which are many, I'm trying to do what I can. So, that is because I have a sense of responsibility. I believe that I have to intervene here because of the fact that these are the basics, the foundations of political science. And if we don't do these properly, and if we do things like Greeks had direct democracy, Athenians had direct democracy. If we go by those kind of things, then what we are actually doing is spreading false knowledge. Now, I can't change the world. There are four of you. If you listen to me, great. If you don't, I tried. That is what I would simply say. So, okay, let's get on with what we were doing. Yesterday, I was talking to you about Plato, and I told you that Plato is somebody who basically believed in living an ethical form of life And I told you that for the Greeks, ethical is more or less coterminous with uh, it's more or less coterminous with um, morals. But later on in the modern period, ethics and morals have changed, thanks mainly to Niccolo Machiavelli. But we'll talk about that when we come to that. It is early right now. So when I just want to put this little bit of an idea into you that for the Greeks, ethics and morals were not very different. But of uh, after the intervention of Machiavelli, where he separated ethics and created politics, and from then onwards, there has been an evolution where the meaning of ethics has changed and the meaning of morality is something that takes precedence. Anyway, so Plato believed in this ethical society. Aristotle, his student, also believed in an ethical society, right? But I told you that they are two very different people. Plato is somebody who saw everything from the point of view of geometry, trigonometry, symmetry, all those things for him, the maintenance of all those things for him in human life constituted ethics. And you had to live by those ethics, which is very clear from the theory of uh, justice that I told you, his idea of justice. You have to do what you're supposed to do, not do what you're not supposed to do. If you do something that you're not supposed to do, then that is a breaking of ethics. So, ethics is brought into the center stage of Politia, which we now refer to as the Republic. And this tradition continues with Aristotle, but in a very, very different way. Plato believed, like Pythagoras, that it was through mathematical formulations that people could come to, what do we say? People could come to understand the purpose of life, the truth, which is the principle that runs the world. That is what Plato believed, and for him, uh, the way to arrive at that was through geometry, trigonometry, mainly. The Greeks were not very hot on arithmetic, which is a much later development, algebra, all those. So Plato believed in this, whereas if you look at Aristotle, Aristotle completely disagrees with Plato. And if you remember, I had told you yesterday, Aristotle came from Stagira to Athens to study with Plato in the academy. And I told you academy is a generic word, which means like today we say academics. So academy is where you study. That's all. So Plato, his academy became pretty famous. So Aristotle came there, studied under Plato, and at the end of it all, he said, much as I love Plato, I love the truth more. So let's try to understand what is it that is driving Aristotle to say that Plato is not able to understand the truth. Now, for this, you'll have to understand two forms of reasoning: deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. If you remember your theorems, okay, if you remember your theorems, or I don't think you have theorems these days, do you in school? No. Okay, so look at the Pythagorean theorem. It's based on an assumption. In a right angle triangle, the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square on the other two sides. So this is how Plato and Pythagoras tried to understand life through this mathematical symmetries. But Aristotle disagreed with them. What you just saw in Plato and Pythagoras is deduction. You begin with a hypothesis. I don't know if you've heard of what a syllogism is. A syllogism is a three-staged, uh, what do we say, logic through which you arrive at a certain conclusion. Okay, a syllogism existed even in ancient India. It was called Tripada Tarka. Tarka is reasoning. Tripada is three steps. A syllogism is the same thing. In deductive reasoning, what you do is you begin with a generalization. You say all trees are green. This is green in color, and therefore this is a tree. If it is not green in color, then it's not a tree, something else. Find out what it is. That's what deductive reasoning says. Inductive, so that is from the general to the particular. The way in which deductive reasoning is done is from the general to the particular. Now, if you look at inductive reasoning is exactly the opposite. It is exactly the opposite of deductive reasoning. You do not begin with a generalization and apply the generalization in order to say something is, what should I say? Something is X or Y or Z. With inductive reasoning, you'll say this is a tree. This is green in color. Therefore, all trees are green in color. So the inductive reasoning begins with the particular, with one, and goes on to a generalization in 3 steps. You can have more than that also. I'm just talking about a syllogism. Uh, Deductive reasoning is the opposite. It starts with a generalization and it comes to a conclusion. Here we start with a particular thing and conclude with a generalization in inductive reasoning. Now, all mathematics is based in deductive reasoning. Most of it, at least, not if not all. Okay, most of it is based in deductive reasoning, geometry, trigonometry, all these are completely based in deductive reasoning. Pythagoras and Plato were doing exactly this deductive reasoning. And they thought it is through this kind of deductive reasoning that one can basically arrive at an understanding of what life is, what the world is. But Aristotle believed that you cannot begin with a hypothesis, then a hypothesis which is based on the particular, and you cannot go, on the general, and you cannot go on to a conclusion about the particular. So he followed inductive reasoning. So he would say, this is green in color, trees are green in color, this is green in color, and therefore this is a tree. Now, if you are looking at this, what you see is Aristotle's inductive reasoning tends to treat human society as a biological entity or a biological organism. Whereas if you take the earlier tradition of Pythagoras and Plato, you can even go back to the Asiatic school, they all believed in the idea that society is not really an organism. Society is something that precedes human beings. And it is through the use of deductive reasoning that we can understand what society is in reality and what or the kind of life we are supposed to lead in this society. Okay, so that is mathematically derived, like Plato's idea of symmetry as being justice. It's complete mathematics. Aristotle didn't agree with Plato. He believed that deductive reasoning works with entities which are not like living beings. It might not, it might work with non-living entities. But if you're talking about living beings, and especially human beings, he's not bothered about the rest of this animal kingdom. He says that just as one person is a biological organism, the whole of human society is also a biological organism. That's what he says. The whole of society is a biological organism. So you should not use mathematical devices, principles, in order to understand something which is like a living system. So Aristotle's disagreement with uh, Plato begins here. It begins here. You might have seen, if you remember your school days, I don't know how the textbooks are these days. Uh, in our times, in almost everything we did, from from biology to civics to everything, there would be Aristotle. Aristotle said this. Aristotle said that. So that is what we used to find in our textbooks. Aristotle covered much more of human life than any other thinker before him did. And the main difference is Aristotle brings about this idea of society being an organism. So, what exactly are we saying that if it is an organism? Okay, what there must be some this thing to it, must be some reasoning to it. What are we? We are organisms. An amoeba is a single-celled, simple organism. Bigger animals, including us, are complex, multicellular organisms. So, Aristotle believed that it is basically the way to understand human society is to understand that as a functioning organism. And all functioning organisms need something to keep them functional. So today, we would say that if somebody has a temperature of 99.2, we'd say that is about normal. Okay, because we have arrived at normal as 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Right. Now, how did we arrive at this normal? How did we arrive that 98.6 is the normal? This is induction. You take the readings of people's, what should we say? You take the readings of people's temperatures, you take as many people as you want, and if the greatest number shows this particular figure, then that is normal. Because most people have that temperature if they are not ill. Okay, so this is inductive. The same thing about blood pressure. Why is 120/80 normal? Because you've taken a number of readings. You've taken a number of readings, and on the basis of those readings of not one person, but many persons, you come to the conclusion that this is how we will, this is basically how we arrive at a normal. But there are some people whose normals are different. I had a friend whose blood pressure was 190 by 110. So he went to a doctor. He said, "Oh, you've got high blood pressure." Gave him all kinds of medication. Nothing happened. It was 190 by 110. And then he was sent to a cardiologist. A battery of cardiologists prescribed all kinds of drugs, but his blood pressure reading would be 190 by 110. So they said, this is your normal, because you're not showing any symptoms of a disease. And I don't know if you know this. Mahatma Gandhi's blood pressure was 220 by 140, and he didn't take any tablets for that. He didn't take any tablets for that. That was his normal. So inductive reasoning will just take the greatest number and say, this is it. This is how we arrive at a normal. Now, Aristotle is doing something like this. Aristotle is slightly different from a modern day inductivist, in the sense that the modern day inductivist will say, I will begin with a clean slate, and we will take it further and see how it works. Aristotle was not like that. Aristotle was a teleological thinker. Teleological, teleological thinker. So who's a teleological thinker? In ancient Greece, there was one particular word, telos, Telos. Now, telos is the ultimate goal. It is the ultimate goal for all of humanity. Now, who's setting this goal? Today, you typically go for an interview. People will say, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Or somebody will ask you, how will you contribute to the betterment of the institution that you're working in? Questions like these are asked, and reasonably stupid answers are also given. But the point is, when there is a telos, it is not up to us to determine the direction in which human society will move. Telos is a predetermined goal. Now, if it is a predetermined goal, please don't think that we'll automatically reach there. Okay, it's not like a train track. You sit in a train, you don't have to do anything. Even the pilot of the locomotive doesn't have to do much. Whenever a train has to change tracks, Somebody else is doing it for them. So it's not that kind of a thing we are talking about. Okay? That we set our goals for ourselves, or that something will happen automatically and it'll happen. I mean, when you get into a plane, for example, there is no reference anywhere in the sky to where you go. So ultimately, you have the altimeters, you have the direction meters, and based upon those, we go to our destination. We reach our destination, even though we take off into the sky, which doesn't tell you anything about anything. Right? So this is something that is done through our efforts. We put in an effort and we say, this is how we will go in a particular direction. Or we'll build a super fast train or a super fast plane. It's our goal. Now, the goal that is being talked about by Aristotle is not this kind of a goal. His goal is an ethical goal. The Greeks had actually started, it started with the Milesians. They had started a tradition wherein they believed, wherein they believed that uh, goal setting is done by ourselves, and search of knowledge is done by ourselves through the use of our rationality. We determine what is good and we determine what is bad, which is a modern paradigm as well. But if you go to Aristotle, Aristotle says it is not in our hands to decide what is good and what is bad. It's not in our hands. What is in our hands is trying to reach an ethical life, which will cater to the collective good of the polis. That is what Aristotle says. And this is not a goal that we have set. For him, this goal has been set by God. It's been set by God. Now, their idea of God doesn't coincide with our ideas of God. Okay? But Aristotle is also not talking about the regular pantheon of Greek gods like Zeus, Apollo, Dionysius, Venus. He's not talking about all those. He's talking about God as the primary cause. Because if you give a causal explanation, you have a problem called infinite regress. So just let me give you a very quick example. The very quick example is this. If you say there is a fire, then you want to know how did the fire break out in the first place? So what you're seeing is the fire, which is an effect caused by something else. So you'll say it seems to be a short circuit. So that now becomes the cause. Okay. Now then you will say, what caused the short circuit? So the short circuit is now the effect. What caused the short circuit is the is what we call the uh, it's a cause. So if you keep going back like this, you'll say the wiring is very old. It wasn't changed. You have to change the wiring, electrical wiring of every house in what do we say? Uh, we basically, sorry. No. So we basically uh, say this 25 years wiring has to be changed. But then why wasn't the wiring changed in this house? Somebody will say the owner didn't know that you had to change the wiring. Then the question is, why didn't he know? He didn't know because he was not educated. So you see, you can keep going back. This questioning, starting with the fire breaking out, which is the effect at that time. If you go in the infinite regress, you're trying to find the cause for the fire breaking out. No, but it's not just an infinite regress. You also have an infinite progress. What did this fire cause? What damage did it cause? You'll say it burned some of the things, but it didn't burn others. You'll say, why did it burn some but not the others? So you see, there is infinite regress and infinite progress. There is no finality to an answer. There is no first question. Now, what Aristotle is doing, he is trying to break the problem of infinite regress, first and foremost. He's trying to break the problem of infinite regress by trying to give us a construct, by trying to give us a construct of what is, what should I say? Um, Trying to give us a construct of a sequence in which you have no end. So Aristotle wants to find out which is the primary cause. A primary cause is a pure cause, which means it's not an effect of anything, but it is the reason why everything else has been caused, including the whole world, including our lives. Everything have been, they have been, what should I say, happening because of going forward, backward. So he wants to break that thing of infinite regress. So, which is that pure cause, the cause that caused every cause and effect. For him, that is the principle of God. Principle is not Zeus, it's not Apollo, none of these people. It is a principle. So what is the principle that Aristotle is talking about? God is perfection. This is his influence on from Plato. God is perfection, and anything that is perfect doesn't have to, uh, it basically doesn't have to change. So all movement is towards perfection. Human life, perfection. Human society, perfection. So we have to reach that. And how do we reach that? We reach that through ethics. We reach that through living an ethical life. I told you there are two kinds of ethics that he talks about. One which was something that came from his father, Nicomachus. So those are called the Nicomachean ethics. And the other was something that came from his student, Eudemus. Now, unlike Plato's academy, Aristotle had a lyceum. Again, a lyceum is not a name. A lyceum is primarily the act of peripatetics or walking around while discussing questions pertaining to knowledge. Now, you might be surprised to know that Aristotle didn't write a single book. He didn't put pen to paper, as we would say. All that we know of Aristotle today is that which has come from the notations that his students made while they were walking around and discussing various issues. That's how they came. So Aristotle didn't write politics. Aristotle didn't write poetics. Aristotle didn't write ethics. It's the students who organized all the material under these different heads. So what you must remember, therefore, is what we know of Aristotle is mainly reporting of his students. It's not something he wrote. Plato wrote. Aristotle didn't. Aristotle only spoke. Okay, so people who were his students, after they had finished their discussions, they went and wrote these things down. So if you take the book Politics, there is a tension between chapter 7 and chapter 8 in the book Politics because of the fact that the interpretations given, obviously it's not written by one person, two persons seem to have written it. One idea contradicts another one. I'm not going to go into what that is. It'll take a lot of time. So you see this peripatetics that he used made his students take down, remember what they were hearing, and going back and writing. So the Lyceum is that. Now, in Aristotle, you will find that there is an attempt to tell you that human society has a telos, which means we don't set this goal for ourselves. The cause of all causes, which is the principle of God, sets this goal for us, which is leading an ethical life. And an ethical life is what basically distinguishes between good life and bad life. So Aristotle talks about good life. Even Vijay Mallya talked about good life. Okay, the king of good life. Poor fellow is not having such a good life. Kawasaki says, let the good times roll. Those are not the things he's talking about. The good that he's talking about is an ethical good. And that ethical good is not something that is subject to debate. It is a given. It's a predetermined goal towards which we have to move in order to create the best possible society. Unlike Plato, who's uncompromising when he says he wants the best society, Aristotle introduces one word, possible, best possible society. So tomorrow, if you come back, I'll finish with this Aristotle thing. So thank you. I have to start the other meeting, other class rather. So thank you very much, those of you who have come. And if you think you're not benefiting, just tell me and I have no problem. I don't take it badly. Okay? So thank you. See you whenever, if ever. Thank you. Thank you.